Redditors who found a secret room. What crazy thing was there? Story one, there was a tile in our kitchen that you could lift up, and there was a hole down to the laundry room in the basement. We usually just used it to talk to anyone that was down there, or a laundry chute if we were too lazy to go downstairs. I had a friend in college from an area that was just over the Mason Dixon line. She lived in a very old house, and the kitchen floor had a section that could open up with a little winding stairway leading down to a hidden room. Turns out that her house used to be a pretty major stop on the Underground Railroad. Because it was so close to the border of a slave state, plenty of escaped slaves would come through there and hide out for a while. Her parents were using it as a wine cellar, though. Story two, my grandparents had a built in bookshelf that could be pulled out of the wall to reveal a small space, about enough to fit three skinny people in. I never knew about it until a game of adult hide and seek, and my uncle hid there, and my grandfather scolded him for revealing it. My grandparents had something like that under some stairs. My grandfather told me that in the late 40s and 50s, bomb shelters were a big deal. Even crappy little cutouts like this with no protection at all were put into houses. Maybe that was the thinking with this. Story three, at my high school, there was a culvert pipe just large enough to crawl through with our backs hunched. We knew that it went as far as the campus pond, and about 15 minutes in, we had to squeeze to the side to avoid the steam pipes. Being stupid kids, we decided to keep going. We walked through that culvert, backs hunched, for 2 hours. Boy, was that worth it. We made it into town and we could see people walking over us through the irrigation grates. For 15 minutes, we'd grab the grate every time someone walked past, shake it, and yell incoherently, effectively scaring the living crap out of them. Story 4. The closest thing I've ever had to a secret room was the tornado shelter in my last house. When my wife and I moved in, we went into the garage and discovered a trap door on the floor. The door leads down to an underground tornado shelter. There were no lights. The stairs creaked horribly, the air was thick with dust, and the echoes sounded like something was walking towards you. To make things even worse, you had to go down the stairs backward, so you couldn't see whatever evil monster was waiting for you in the dark. I told my wife, that tornado shelter is scarier than a tornado. I'm never going down there. But later, we actually had a tornado warning. We grabbed flashlights and sleeping bags and rushed down there. It turned out, once you walked around the corner, the super creepy tornado shelter was bright pink and covered in ladybug stickers. Apparently, the last owner's little girl used it as a playroom. Story 5. This is more of a family legend, but here it goes. Everyone always heard that my great grandma had built a secret room in her farm somewhere. No one knew where it was or what she kept in there, but the speculation was that it was gold, as she always saved money, bought gold, and there was no trace of it. She died without telling anyone, or so we thought. However, an aunt started going to the old ranch an awful lot in the months following her death. She went repeatedly, and then suddenly stopped. About a year later, a different family member found a will with the location to the secret, a small 2 by 2 crevice with a lock. Many members of the family went together to prevent foul play, but found that the lock was broken and the small room empty. Looking back at the clues, that first aunt suspiciously had money to buy herself property and businesses in the times following the death. Although she never admitted to it, most of the family is convinced that great grandma had a stash of gold, so the aunt found it and hoarded it. No one knows for sure, though. Story 6. My best friend works maintenance or groundskeeping at a high school. One day he found a strange cylindrical hole in the packed dirt under one of the older buildings on campus. The hole was about 6 feet across and 3 feet deep. One afternoon, when work was light, he lined the edge with rocks, complete with mortar, to make them look like they had always been there. Then he got some old timber out of storage and put up some posts and a beam across the hole, so it looked exactly like the top of an old well. He repositioned the lights in the crawl space so only one would come on, and it would strategically rake light across the opening of the well, so the bottom was always in complete darkness. You seriously could not tell how deep this well went down. He sent me pictures. Last, he took a few broken toys out of the lost and found that had been in there for years, and he put them on the far side of the well, just visible if you look closely. Then, he turned off the lights and walked away. Within a month, without him saying a word to anyone about it, he started overheating kids whispering about the death well under the school and the bottomless pit and things like that. It's been probably 5 years since he built the well, and it's still standing. The toys are all still there, and the kids still talk about it. One last thing, none of the students have ever asked him about the well. But if they do, his response is going to be, "Don't ever go near that well. That's what it wants." And then he'll limp quickly away. He doesn't have a limp. I think it's brilliant. Story 7. I used to live in suburban Detroit, where people had immense fear of breaking and entering. So, when we moved into our new house, the landlord showed us the special cabinet. One of the cabinets in the office room, off the living room, was actually a passageway, tiny passageway, to a small room with some water bottles, gas masks, and other important survival things. It had room for about 2 or 3 people. Needless to say, we never used it. Story 8. I worked at the Banff Springs Hotel about 15 years ago. The place was supposedly haunted by Sam the bellhop, who had worked in the big old hotel for over 60 years, his entire life. From time to time over the years, there were reports of luggage disappearing from the bellhop area later to be discovered in the guest's room. Upon discreet inquiry, the guests would describe a kind old gentleman in a gray bellhop uniform who brought their bags in for them and refused to accept a tip. The gray uniform had been retired long ago. In other words, Sam was still lending a hand from time to time. I was a runner. My job was to find stuff guests had requested and bring it to them. 1206 wants an extra blanket, kettle for 304, comp 612 a bottle of wine, etc. All this stuff was locked up in random closets and areas and cupboards all over the old hotel. They gave me a huge set of keys and a map, but no clues as to where any specific items were located. One day I was searching for a power adapter and not having any luck when I came upon a door without any signage. Assuming it was a closet because it didn't have a room number, I started trying keys until I found one that fit. Once inside, it took me a minute of looking around, but suddenly I realized I had discovered Sam the bellhop's old staff accommodation. It was clear nobody had been in this room for years. What I presume were his uniforms were hanging on a coat rack. Sam was stitched over the heart, the same place we were told to wear our nameplates in orientation. On the bedside table was an expensive-looking bottle of port wine and a stemmed glass. Both were covered with a thick layer of dust, perhaps as an offering to the restless spirit. "Have a drink with us, Sam, your favorite. Job well done. You've earned a rest." I took it all in, the old bed frame, the frayed carpet, the stationery with the old Canadian Pacific Railway logo, the smell. Then I slowly backed out and gently closed the door. Story 9. I was a maintenance guy or custodian for a high school, and my shift started about an hour before school let out and ended around 11:30 at night. I couldn't clean anything while students were in my area, so I would go to the storage closet and climb up the ladder to the ventilation room. It was the area you needed to go to replace air filters. The room itself used to be for team meetings for basketball games before renovations, so it was huge. Also near the IT room, so it had Wi-Fi. Best part was that someone had pulled up a chair from the auditorium and put it in a space around the corner. So I would go up there for an hour if I had nothing to do, chill in a comfy chair and browse Reddit. Got even better when I found a good tennis ball and would play wall ball in this giant cement room. Story 10. One job I used to work at was on the 10th floor of an office building, but due to fire safety rules, they were limited in their occupancy permit to about half of what they needed. So they literally built a wall in the hallway, which cut the place in half, and then added a hutch-sized door on this new wall that they then put a photocopy machine in front of. This hid half the company behind this micro door that hopefully the fire marshal would not discover. Story 11 had a small door, like think being John Malkovich, in a room in a house I rented. The landlord told me not to worry about it and never open it. Of course, that wasn't going to do anything but make me want to open it. Sadly, it was a school lease. I took the place, had to sublet it to a friend for the summer cause I was going home. So I literally took possession and then handed the keys over to him. So I finally move in months later and I ask him about the door, and he says, "Oh, me and the girlfriend call it the bathroom door. The guy was right, you don't want to open it." So what the hell? Of course I opened it, almost immediately after he's gone. Turns out they called it the bathroom, not the bathroom door. Door couldn't be opened for more than 10 seconds when bats came flying out of the door. Only 3 or 4, but even one bat is crazy. Turns out he had opened it and had way more than that when he did, and had to get professionals to remove them and clean up the damage, and didn't want to tell me or me tell the landlord. So at least he had the number of the guys who did the removal. They asked me if we will ever learn. Story 12. Sort of. I used to live in a big old house in the mountains of California. When I was 8, I was rustling around in some big bushes up against the side of the house and found a boxy structure with a heavy door. To the left of the door, someone had scrawled "The Lost World" and drew the Jurassic Park logo. As a Jurassic Park fan and budding young buccaneer, this intrigued me. Did this door lead to some kind of lost world? Was it hiding a fabulous secret? I spent 3 years trying to find out, but the door was always shut fast and locked with a big brass padlock. My schemes to invade, including digging under it from beneath the front porch, were failures. Finally, not long before we moved, I found the door unlocked and ajar. Flush with success, I crept inside the wellhouse, a cramped, stuffy little room containing only the well pump, spider webs, and a smaller door to the space under the house. It was anticlimactic, but it did give me 3 years of childish fancy. Story 13. A junior high school that I used to go to for language classes had a hallway at a corner of the building, which was completely dark. The hall led to a stairwell, which was dark as well. The teachers always used to tell the students to never go upstairs, so naturally we formed raiding parties to find out what was upstairs. I don't know why, but you'd think it would have been easy to get a bunch of kids to run through a hallway and up some stairs, but there were a lot of failed attempts because the parties would fall apart because teachers came to stop us, or kids would run back as soon as they got to the stairs because they were scared crapless. Anyways, it was after quite some time before we actually managed to reach the top of the stairs, and what we saw up there reinforced the rumor that that place was haunted. Basically, you walk up these steps in complete darkness, and you're met with a bright painting of a clown or something at the top. Let's just say there were no more attempts to explore further upstairs anymore after that day. Story 14. It's not exactly a secret room, but rather a secret space. After my senior year of high school, I worked the summer as a laborer at the school. They were doing extensive renovations, and they hired a few students to do the unskilled work so that they wouldn't have to pay the contractors guys to do it. In the library, there was the school vault, which mostly held old records, blueprints, and some time capsule stuff. The vault was only about 7 feet high, and the ceilings in that wing were about 10 feet. We tore out the old plywood and veneer that had filled the space between the vault and the ceiling, and there was a mother lode of old stuff, presumably from the last time renovations had been done. There were notes from kids in the 1960s, some pictures, baseball cards, a pair of panties, and some old beer cans. So we kept everything up there in its place, and then added some of our own. A picture of the four of us, with names on the back, a list of who the hot girls and teachers were at school, and I think a Skillet CD someone had in their car. We put it all in a box the next day, got back up on top of the vault, and shoved everything just out of sight. The next week, the contractor came in and bricked over crawl space, so we assume that stuff won't surface again until the building is demolished. Unfortunately, we didn't recognize any of the names on the stuff from the 60s, otherwise we'd have let them know. I sure hope somebody contacts us in 40 years. Story 15, not a secret room, but one time I was playing in my yard, crawling around a hedge for some reason. I noticed a weird parting in the hedges. The branches were kind of woven in front of something. I looked closer. Behind the woven branches, there was a perfectly cut little arch, just the right size for a 5-year-old kid to duck through. What was this? A secret garden? A path to Oz? I went in further and found a cleared out circle in the middle of the tall hedges, with some sort of leafy plants growing in the center, totally inaccessible from anywhere but the small tunnel. I had found my dad's pot plants. Story 16, oh yeah, at my primary school while I was there. We were fighting in the bike sheds at the back of the yard. One of us slammed another into the wall and went straight through. Years and years of paint had covered up a rotten wooden door that nobody had any clue was there. It led to a small bit of land that was stuck between residential gardens and a quarry. It was totally overgrown. I remember my teacher saying nobody had been back there for at least 60 years, because she too went to school there. Even as overgrown as it was still very recognizable as a garden. There were steps down that led to a small clearing. The best bit didn't actually come to light until the summer afterwards. We had an after school club that took kids in during the summer, and restoring the secret garden became their project. They found, after clearing all the overgrown grass away, a pretty that the steps on the clearing actually formed a pretty huge dragon mosaic, the school's mascot. I was back at that school last year. They use that garden all the time for the kids' lessons. They grow all sorts of things in there and study the wildlife that they find. It's kind of awesome to know that we had a hand in finding this lost little bit of land. Story 17. There are apparently some huge tunnels underneath my old high school. The entryway was a trapdoor underneath the auditorium stage. It had wooden panels you could pry off if for some reason you wanted to venture into the dust dimension. Well, the techies, and light and sound guys and girls for the school musicals, etc., mounted a camera on a remote controlled car and sent it down there. Basically, endless darkness after descending 10 feet or so. This drop would break your ankle. They moved down a horizontal corridor for a bit, and apparently there was just a sudden drop that they had no idea how far went down. No pivot control on the camera. The car was attached to a string, so they pulled it back up. No one seems to have any idea about the tunnels. Obviously, we surmise they're connected to the other schools in the area, but they're not meant for human travel. I doubt there's anything sinister about them, but it was fun to entertain the imagination. Story 18, my parents' old house in Kent, southern England, had a cellar that they filled in with rubble from the renovation work and regretted doing ever after. The house wasn't widely old. A bit of it was 17th century, some 18th, but there had certainly been a dwelling on that site for a long time. Anyway, there was a tunnel heading out from the cellar, angled so it pointed directly at the church, which was on the other side of the road and maybe 100 yards away. The church is Norman, late 11th century, almost certainly a smuggler's tunnel. Village vicars and parsons were frequently part of the smuggling gangs in the 18th century because it was not quite the done thing to search a church. And the 18th century saw a big upsurge in smuggling. 4 and 20 ponies, trotting through the dark, brandy for the person, baccy for the clerk, as Kipling put it. I imagine the tunnel's still there. Story 19. In high school, I hated gym class. Our strength training equipment was set up on the out-of-use stage in the gym. One day we noticed that there was a panel kicked out of the door that led to the stage left area. We could just barely squeeze through the hole, so we went exploring. It was mostly storage, but then we noticed that there was a ladder leading up to a hatch. We went up there and it was all the outdoor ed equipment from a now defunct program, snowshoes and stuff. But more importantly, there were windows overseeing the entire gym. So we ended up with a little hideout where we could hide through the entire class and then watch for the teacher coming to check on our group and sneak back down when she came in, so she wouldn't notice our absence. Story 20, I worked at our school in the summer, and in the basement was a sealed door that had obviously been closed for decades. One day, me and some other menial workers spent half a day prying it open. It was amazing. It appeared to be living quarters, complete with an old gas stove and bathroom. It was nasty and decayed, and we found papers from the early 40s. So figured that was about when it was sealed. There was an old desk and bed, all covered with mold and crap. But there's more. There was a tunnel that ran the full length of the school with other doors, but they were bricked up. At the far end was a large rifle or gun range, with targets still hanging. There were also old mats and balls and gym storage. There were a few other empty rooms which probably housed records or something. It was an amazing day. This was late 70s, and not sure if anyone has gone in since. Story 21. My elementary school had a trapdoor-like thing covered by carpet, but you know it was there. And you could tell it was hollow every time you would step on it. Of course, his kids made dozens of rumors about it. That's where the teachers put you when you get detention. A live fox, and the school's mascot, lives under there and will eat you. Teachers sleep there, etc. I got to go back into the school a few years later, right before it got torn down, and asked a janitor about it. He opened the door and it turned out to be a bomb and tornado shelter. It had enough room for the 300 kids or teachers to hide down there in a little pantry, but not much else. Story 22. One time a friend of mine and I had to serve a weekend detention as punishment for something stupid we did. They had us cleaning some of the back rooms in the church that was attached to the school. We had always heard a rumor that there was a bowling alley in the basement, and we decided to use this opportunity to look for it. After about an hour, the person who was in charge left us on our own to clean while they did something else in their office. That's when we used the opportunity to go and look around. It took about 30 minutes before we found a door that led down these stairs to the basement of the church. It was really dark, and we didn't have cell phones back then, so the only light we had were from a lighter I had. We went walking around, and eventually we found the bowling alley, which was a couple of lanes away. There were chairs and tables stacked down the lanes, since the basement was mostly used for storage. Honestly, it was very underwhelming, because we didn't expect it to be in such bad shape. After seeing it, we went back upstairs so that we wouldn't get into more trouble for sneaking off. It was cool to know that it was more than just a rumor, but at the same time, it sucked knowing they had this really awesome thing in the basement, just gathering more dust.